honestly became more well-known as a barista than a drummer, which was really frustrating for me. I remember I was in the Zurich, Switzerland airport, and I ran into somebody that knew me from somewhere. And I was hoping they would say, "Oh yeah, you're that drummer, that great jazz drummer, right?" And they were like, "No, you made me a lot." It's like, God damn, really?
Yeah.
But it paid the bills, man.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. Before we get into today's episode, I'd just like to give a special welcome to our new producer, Jeff Meese. Jeff is a colleague here at the University of Montana College of Business. I guess his title is Instructional Technician. He's basically the go-to guy for all things video and sound happening here at the college and just does fantastic work. In addition to that, Jeff has a tremendous CV of credits in the production space here in Montana. I mean, he's done work for HBO, Vice Media, National Geographic, and many others. And so having Jeff on the team and his expertise is just fantastic. It's certainly pushing me to understand sound more completely and the importance of it in the production. And he produced last week's episode. That was his first one with Nick Triolo, and he comes on board, and we're really excited to have Jeff and his contributions to the show. So welcome, Jeff. Anyway, let's turn our attention to this week's guest, John Wicks. John Wicks is the drummer for Fitz in the Tantrums, a tremendously successful band on the world scene. I mean, this guy's constantly posting pictures on his Instagram feed of them playing to 70,000 person arenas all over the world. And they've had just huge success with their latest album, and the single Hand Clap off of that album was just an out-of-the-park success. So it's interesting to talk to John. He's a Missoula resident and passionate outdoor athlete. We have a lot in common, and we've known each other for a number of years here in the Missoula scene. And talking to John, it was fun to learn about just the grit, determination, hustle, and focus that he had to succeed in his profession. And as a drummer, how he worked his way up through the ranks, sort of mastered his craft, and now is in a position of tremendous success. And what now is next? I mean, you hear him talk about the pressures that come with producing a tremendously successful album, and some expectations to do it all over again, and some creative forces in the band where they're thinking about, well, maybe we're not so sure about doing the same thing over again. So interesting conversation with John. And then the other side of it, geez, I mean, we could make 2 awesome episodes just out of a conversation with John, but several years ago, he launched in tandem with his wife, Jenna, Drum Coffee. A really awesome coffee shop, cafe, roastery here in Missoula. And they have 2 locations, produce a great product, a fantastic experience. And we talk about that and how he sort of became a student of the coffee game and has tried to bring a lot of those insights to the Missoula populace. Anyway, I will turn it over to John Wicks. All right, so we're here today with John Wicks. John, thanks for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we go back a bit. In fact, we had an interesting meeting moment where you responded to a Craigslist ad about my van. Right?
I should
sold
at
you
this
a
point I
used
should
car.
fake you son of a bitch,
I know. I sold you a used car.
You sold me a used car.
And the friendship was made to last.
That was my dream car, but I think Jenna broke it to you. I had to sell it.
Well, I had a moment where I saw Jenna roll up in an F-150,
right,
which, as you know, is the truck I bought when I sold you the van, and I thought, what's going on here with the Wicks family?
I'm kind of stalking you, man.
Car stalking me.
Doing what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. It was. I love that car. I'm not really a car person at all. I drive around a '78 Nova. That was my grandmother's car, which is a rad car. But I've always lusted after those Eurovans.
Yeah.
And I had this dream of me and my wife and my 2 kids camping and doing that. And we did do that a few times, but I forgot to factor in that my daughters grow like really fast.
Yeah.
And the last time we tried it, didn't really go that well, and so it was kind of like my cue to move on.
I understand that life cycle. Well, we could convince all day about our used car transactions, but very few people are probably that interested in that. What they're interested in is you as a rock and roll star, but also as an entrepreneur here in Missoula. You and your wife have opened up 2 cafes now and a roaster. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about all of that. But first, I'd like to kind of talk about your existence as a musician, as a drummer for Fitz and the Tantrums, and we don't need to go into the whole story about the band, but mostly like, how does a rock and roll star like yourself live in Missoula, Montana?
Right.
Why here, and why that choice, and how did that come to be?
Well, so going back a bit, I'm originally, I'm a Navy brat, so we moved around a lot as a kid.
Right.
My dad was a commander in the Navy, and then when he retired, we moved to Seattle from New Orleans. And
that's a big move.
Yeah, it was huge, man. And it was at a weird time. I was a young kid, actually right about my daughter's age. And so we moved to Bainbridge Island. And it was very isolated and very rainy. And I hated it at first. And then it grew on me after a while, and I really enjoyed it. And looking back, it was a pretty idyllic place to grow up. And so I kind of grew up there, and then when I graduated high school, I moved to Ellensburg, Washington, and went to Central Washington University there for a few years. And then I tried everything I could possibly try to get away from drumming. My parents were not especially supportive of me pursuing music at that point. They had understandably a lot of worries about me pursuing it as a career.
Sure.
But I tried everything from graphic design to communications. I was a DJ. I tried everything I could do to try to find something where out of college I'd be making some decent money. Mm-hmm. But I was spending all my spare time practicing drums still, and I finally had a meeting with my dad. He came to visit in Ellensburg, and I laid it out for him and just said, I don't really want to do anything else, and he was like, well, you've given these things a fair shake, but you're on your own,
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I really wanted to move to Boston. I wanted to go to school at Berklee College of Music.
Okay, I know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to experience the East Coast. I'd never been there, and at that time, I was solely a jazz musician. That's all I wanted to do, And that's where you needed to be. I mean, it was New York in particular was where I wanted to end up, and I wanted to make a living as a jazz drummer. So I moved there, and it was tough, man. I had a scholarship there for 1 year, a partial scholarship, and then I was hustling, and right about that same time, just before I had left there, in order to raise money for school, I worked at the very first Starbucks.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And back up one second. Was there
Sure.
something about jazz that, in particular, that style of music? Because I'm thinking about the timing when you were growing up in Seattle. I mean, there's all kinds of different types of musics evolving, emerging. Why jazz?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was very lucky. My parents were jazz fans. In particular, they were fans of one piano player named Ahmad Jamal, who there was a record that he put out called Live at the Pershing. And I heard that record, and there was something about that record that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I wore out several copies of that record, just playing to it in my garage. And then I was really lucky in that I had a teacher named Alan Valairs in middle school and high school band, who, I had a wonderful father. I didn't need a second father, but he was like a second father
Sure.
to me, and recognized my talent and the drive that I had, and fueled that with even just giving me more records to listen to, and that were kind of touchstone records that, you sort of needed to listen to as a jazz musician. So I couldn't get enough, and I loved it, and I loved being able to express myself on that instrument, and jazz music that's what it allows you to do.
Yeah.
And it also requires a huge amount of musicianship and technique and practice in order to play it well. And I was spending every moment in the practice room just trying to get better and better and better and better. So yeah, that was it. I was just really lucky that I found this teacher, and he was my teacher through middle school and high school, and yeah, it was match made in heaven there.
Sure.
And so yeah, I moved to the East Coast there to try to do that, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made, because when I was at Berklee, I mean, the drumming talent pool at Berklee is always super deep.
Yeah.
But at that time, Abe Laboriel Jr. was there, who was the drummer for Paul McCartney now. John Blackwell, who was the drummer for Prince, was there.
Wow.
Little John Roberts, who was drummer for Janet Jackson. A bunch of people was there. Jorge Rossi, who was jazz pianist Brad Meldau's drummer, was there. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And I was, those were the guys that I was always putting my ear to the wall.
Elite center. Right?
Yeah, totally. And just trying to keep up with that crowd was one of the big ass kickings that I needed, in order to know whether I could hang. Mm-hmm. And there was only one way to do it, and that was to dive in and see. Otherwise, Ellensburg was wonderful. I loved that town and I loved that school, but it wasn't giving me the cross-section.
Yeah, you're not rubbing elbows with that crowd.
No. Hey, man, you know what, though? There's still guys that come out of that school that are professional drummers.
Sure.
And at that time, even then, at that time, the drumming talent pool at Central Washington University was no joke. But I needed to know, otherwise I would have been asking, or it would have been like, I could have moved to New York, or I could have moved to Boston, but, I didn't want to be that guy.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to really
like a no regrets
Yep.
type of attitude. So that kind of comes to an end, that phase, and you move back to Seattle.
Well, it came to an end a lot quicker than I anticipated, because I was starving. I was living on a bag of potatoes and top ramen, and I tried to move to New York to try to make a living there, and it was a rude awakening for me, man. And not that I couldn't hang ability-wise, but my heroes were, passing the hat at clubs to make extra money,
Wow.
and seeing guys that had played with Thelonious Monk and like that, trying to make some tips, that was for me an awakening. Like, okay, dude, if they're doing it, what are you doing?
So what you're saying is the best of the best are kind of starving at best.
Yeah, man.
And
really
so
struggling.
this is a hard path that you've chosen at this point.
Yeah, and I could have, I guess it would. I guess I suffer some punk rock or jazz or guilt a little bit, because that's part of it. That's why you move to New York. Yeah. You move to New York to starve, to do that, and it was tough. But just as a drummer, getting around in New York was really tough. You can't bring your drums on the subway. Cab drivers won't let them load them into a cab.
Right.
You can't have a car in New York. So how do you get around? So that's why when you see drummers in New York, they're usually playing a little converted bass drum that's 16 inches wide, and a snare drum and a couple cymbals, and that's about it. Because you got to get around somehow, So it's just tough. It's a hustle, and I enjoyed the hustle, but I was just going deeper and deeper in debt, and having a rough time making the rent, and so sort of with my tail between my legs, I moved back to Seattle.
Sure.
And right about then was when the grunge era was hitting.
Yeah.
And,
so this is early 90s, late.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is about 95, about 95, and our buddy Jeff Ament was killing it in Pearl Jam, and all those bands were just killing it, and I sort of kind of missed that. Because I was a jazzer, and so I was a little out of the loop when I moved back to Seattle. It had blown up in Seattle when I left. Right in those years I left, it had changed completely. It used to be this little outpost that no one ever went to, no one toured to.
Yeah.
They went as far north as Portland, and that was about it. And so it was very different when I got back, but it was exciting at the same time. It was
a lot of change.
Yeah. There's a lot of guys, more optimism, I guess, because the scene had blown up there, and
which is funny. That's not a word you often associate with the grunge movement. It's
right.
Optimism, right?
Yeah, that's true. But,
yeah, but I can see it's opportunity, and the world's expanding, and all of a sudden the spotlight is on Seattle in a new way, and for better or for worse.
Right, and it kind of branched off also into just the general Seattle lifestyle. That's right about the time Starbucks was blowing up.
Yep.
And I was there for that, and I was too cool for it. I was like working. I went straight back to working at Starbucks, and was working at Columbia Center and First Interstate Building downtown, super busy cafes, and but it started to. The green aprons appeared and the uniforms appeared, and I was like, man,
not your bag.
No, no, it wasn't. So I started going to working at independent cafes around Seattle.
Yeah.
And I worked at so many of them, and honestly became more well known as a barista than a drummer, which was really frustrating for me. I remember I was in the Zurich, Switzerland airport, and I ran into somebody that knew me from somewhere. And I was hoping they would say, "Oh yeah, you're that drummer, that great jazz drummer, right?" And they were like, "No, you made me a lot." It's like, God damn it, really?
Yeah.
But it paid the bills, man, and right about that time is when I met my wife, Jenna, my wife-to-be, Jenna. I met her through Maggie Cornell, who was Chris Cornell's sister, and Maggie was also a barista, and she was a dear friend of mine, and she thought that Jenna and I would hit it off, so she was kind of matchmaker there. And
nice, well
Jenna,
done.
Yeah, totally. I owe her big time, and that was over 20 years ago now, so it's worked out. But so kept going there and kept hustling, just playing jazz music. That was it. And then suddenly, something changed where I became a little bit tired of the athleticism of that music. It became more about the technique and more about how many notes can I play and how fast can I play.
I see. It's more about the technique than the art in a way?
Yeah. It was sort of under the guise of art, but when it didn't feel that way to me anymore. And I started to listen to other players that I felt like were using space more. And I started to get away from just like swing rhythms, and I started to around that time hip hop started really catching my ear. There was a record called 3 Feet High and Rising by De La Soul that came out just a little bit earlier than that, and it was all samples, and inside the record cover they would list what the records were that they sampled. And I made it my goal to buy every one of those records and learn. Like, they were sampling Led Zeppelin, they were sampling Steely Dan, they were sampling all these stuff. So I started just doing all this research in, like, who's Led Zeppelin? I didn't even, that's how deep into jazz I was.
Yeah.
I didn't know who Led Zeppelin was, and Steely Dan I knew. But, so I just started researching. And then I got into, jazz music that was using Hammond organ. It was soul-infused jazz. I was like, that's cool, because it's like a backbeat thing, and like people can dance to it, but it's still technically jazz music, and then it got further and further, and then my priorities started to change, where I was like more about how can I affect a lot of people and make them dance. And that became more of the thrill, because that's the power of drums, And I started to realize that that's what I was missing when I was playing jazz music, is that I was missing creatively, and I was hitting people in the audience, but they were sitting down and more analytically listening than just viscerally having a great time.
And so I'm just trying to kind of layer this onto your kind of professional trajectory.
Sure.
So you're working in the coffee shop, you're trying to catch a break as a drummer.
Yeah.
But this new kind of artistic perspective or really your personal mission is starting to emerge.
Right.
How does that layer onto what's going on in terms of the gigs that you're getting?
Yeah, so that's honestly, this is where kind of it ties into the lessons I learned, and what am I doing opening cafes and that kind of thing. Well, all of these lessons that I learned during this time period, as far as how to promote a band, just being in a band. Before that, I wasn't bands. You know what I mean? It was like quartets,
Sure.
trios,
Sure.
things like that.
Arrangements.
But then suddenly I was like, oh, wait, I should start a band in these styles that I want to learn, like hip-hop or soul or punk or whatever it was. But then I need a band name. Well, a band name's a brand.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, well, how do I promote a brand? And then it became like this obsession with me, like, okay, how do I promote these things? You know, and I'm that guy. I'm that guy that was putting up flyers on telephone poles around Capitol Hill, you know? And, you know, I remember distinctly, I had a friend of mine from high school named Steve Screen who, after college, went into kind of the family business, which was advertising. And I remember talking to him once. I was like, I really want to learn how to make a band a brand. And he, you know, bless his heart, he heard me when I said that. And like a week later, he gave me this photocopied pamphlet of an article called The Brand Called You. And I still have it to this day.
Yeah.
And I forget who it was written by, but it changed my life, man. It was like how to brand something. And so I've sort of like been obsessed with it ever since in different ways. So I started, you know, whatever style of music I wanted to learn, I would start a band, right? And then I'd figure out, okay, how do I get a steady night, a weekly night at some club on, you know, a really crappy dive bar on an off night so they'll let it build. And then I would start like a themed night with this band playing every week.
Yep.
And then it would be whatever style I was learning at that time. And it was usually danceable stuff, you know, and they would, you know, it would let me, you know, you approach like a club owner, you say, give me a Sunday or Monday, just give me a month. And then that's where the magic of coffee entered, because I was working these hip indie cafes where every customer that I made a drink for would get a flyer for my weekly gig,
yeah,
right?
a little promotion.
So, yeah, man, and it was the best promotion ever, you know. And like they would come and the bartenders were like, "How are you getting all these people down to these shows?" You know, like it's my coffee gig, you know. And then inadvertently, I sort of fell in love with coffee and how that's made as well. So I just kept practicing, and it was very humbling at the same time, because playing jazz music for that many years was really good for certain aspects of my playing, but not so much when it came to moving a huge room of people. So it was a different skill set that I had to practice, and it was inspiring. So I started to listen to a lot of session musicians, guys that played on people's records, and tried to figure out what was it that they did that made them in demand, you know? What was it that Bernard Purdy played on all of these amazing hundreds and thousands of records that people wanted him? And a lot of it had to do with confidence. A lot of it had to do with playing less, only playing what was necessary, and having extremely solid time. And so it became, you know, I literally slept with a metronome, you know, like with it clicking through the night to become more comfortable with a metronome and playing to a metronome. And so that became my goal, was to be able to play sessions. And
so can I ask kind of a creative question? And it sort of reveals my sort of terrible ignorance when it comes to music. But so I'm thinking about, like, whether it's a session drummer or you're like, you know, a singer, songwriter has the idea of bringing you in.
Yeah.
You know, I assume some sort of music is emerging, and with that, some sort of a lyric. And then are you just sort of left to your own to figure out the drum line that fits with what they're creating? Is that kind of how it works? Yeah.
Usually, like, if I'm in a recording situation, nowadays it's a different story. Nowadays they'll usually have a temp track with some sort of programmed drum part that they feel like is in the ballpark, but they want that human element with more feel.
Yeah.
So they'll bring me in a lot of times after the fact, almost last, where it used to be the drummer was always done first. They needed a good drum track to build everything on.
Foundation.
Yeah. Now with the advent of digital recording and the grid and all the software that's available, they're able to do a lot of the work before I even come in the room, and then a lot of times they just want drums to make it sound better. So yeah, usually nowadays it's kind of like the last thing, where it used to be the first thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
for better or for worse.
But so you're trying to find your way with these musicians, and also, you know, building your own brand, and I can see how this is all kind of coming together.
Yeah, absolutely. And then right about that time, when my mother was had ovarian cancer, and so Jenna, my wife, and I we're still dating at that point, but we had planned to move to LA eventually,
Yep.
so that I could give it a shot.
Yep.
But I didn't want to abandon my mom, who was very sick, and my dad, who was trying to deal with that. So and my mom fought hard for 5.5 years with chemotherapy, and technically at one point was in remission, but it came back. Yeah. And she eventually passed away, which was devastating. And yet it's at the same time sort of opened a door. It was kind of like, okay, this part of your life's done. It's time to move on. So it was kind of our cue to move to LA. And it was scary, man. It was a big leap of faith because I'd sort of developed my brand, in Seattle, where I was working 5-6 nights a week playing. In various musical projects and stuff, and doing okay, but it was more like still playing for like $50 a night, something like that.
So you're at best going sideways financially, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was teaching a lot too. I was teaching out Seattle Drum School.
Okay, so that helps.
And I had at one point, I had like 47 students. I was really teaching a ton. But yeah, it was still in the back of my head. You're going to be really sorry if you don't at least
That's
try
probably like that existence, teaching 47 students, playing 6 nights a week is like not the dream shot of the life of you musician that you
Not
had
for
in your
me.
mind, right?
Not for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess at the time I was feeling very lucky that I was working, and I enjoyed teaching because I was practicing at the same time as teaching. Of course. But yeah, I wasn't
LA was
satisfied.
calling, and it was time.
Yeah, that was. I'm still to this day, and just never, always visualizing what's next, and that was it. And I knew it was going to work. I don't know why I knew, but I just knew it was going to work, and I could visualize myself down there. And so we made the leap of faith, and we moved down there, and it took 2 years for the phone to ring. I was working more coffee gigs down there, but just saying yes to everything I could, and then eventually my first gig is very strangely enough, with actress Minnie Driver. She's also a singer-songwriter, and was recommended for her and auditioned for her, but I literally got it because I got along with her black Labrador Retriever, I think. It's
a good skill set.
Yeah, right. It's a good skill set to have. And
to piss off the dog.
Right,
I mean, that's pretty good intuition, John.
But seriously, man, I saw the guys coming out of the audition that I knew from like drumming magazines, and I'm like, they're not going to hire me for this, and I got the gig, know. And I swear it's because I said hi to her dog before I walked in. But it worked, and I got that gig, and that was sort of like the very beginning. And then Money Mark from the Beastie Boys called me and said, "Hey, man, I'm flying to Japan in 2 days. You want to come play?"
Yes.
Yeah, the Fuji Rock Festival with me. I had never met him, and I was a huge Beastie Boys fan, obviously, and so he said, "Yeah, we'll rehearse tomorrow, and we'll expedite your passport thing. I got this. There's this company in LA that specializes in that.
It can be done."
Okay, so I did it, man. We flew all the way to Tokyo, played for 45 minutes, and flew back, and it was crazy, man, and that was like a life-changing experience. And so then I came back, and the reason Money Mark had called me is I had done a couple sessions for a producer that he had worked with, and he recommended me, said I learned stuff fast and showed up on time. So yeah, man. And then I started doing sessions for this producer, and that got me on Bruno Mars' first record.
Okay.
And then I was working with some buddies of mine just trying to write songs, and some of the songs got put on Bruno's first record. And then that led to me playing with CeeLo Green on his record.
Yeah, and so your network's expanding.
Yeah, and then suddenly it was just like blowing up, you know? And so what happened was, and this is kind of goes back to the branding thing, music is so vast that when I first moved to LA, I was doing a lot of singer-songwriter gigs. And I was saying yes to everything that I could. But it got to a point where I realized that wasn't really what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I love playing with singer-songwriters, but really when I was really honest to myself, what really attracted me was going back to that De La Soul record, like the stuff that people sample is the stuff that I'm really into, the funky stuff that people really want to move to. And so I started to see more and more that that's what I should head for. And through some really good teachers, I developed a really good ear for knowing how to get sounds that sounded like they were recorded in the 60s. Like I'm very adept at knowing how to play touch-wise and what drum to choose, how to hit the drum, how to tune it, how to, to get these sounds like 60s samples.
Sure.
Okay. And it became really a blessing because as people sample more, the people who were getting sampled were starting to, sue more for using their samples.
Oh,
and
yep. So they need somebody that can bypass the sample.
Yeah. They'll play me a record and say, hey, man, here's this 60s, Caetano Veloso record from Brazil. Can you sound like this Brazilian funk drummer from the 60s? And I'm like, yeah, sure, And so I would know what mics to use, where to place them, and walk in and be able to get it done in a short amount of time. And so that was kind of my niche, man. And like suddenly Bruno Mars was calling and CeeLo Green was calling, and like I was starting to get these things because they didn't want to clear samples and they didn't want to pay these huge amounts of money to clear samples. So I became that guy, and then that led me to Fitz. Fitz his first little EP demo that he had that sound of old Motown kind of stuff.
And when is this? Like early 2000, mid 2000s?
This would be 03.
03, okay.
Or no, excuse me. No, not 03. What am I saying? 09. Sorry.
Yeah, I thought, okay.
Jeez,
So
lost
more
track
recent.
of time. Yeah, sorry. 09. And so, I got recommended from a keyboard player that I had played with to Fitz, and he just called me for a dive bar gig, and I listened to his demo, and I'm like, this is cool, and this is kind of up my alley. So I said, yeah. And then suddenly, I had only planned to do a couple gigs with him in bars, but there was lines around the block. And then there was more lines. Yeah, and then bigger clubs with lines around the block. And suddenly 2 gigs turned into 10 gigs and a residency in LA and jaded LA, and people were loving it. And everyone hates everything in LA, they've already seen and done it. So, yeah, man, it's one of those things where that branding of myself and deciding this is my strong point, this is what I need to focus on, that really paid off.
Hi, I'm Jackie Moore. I'm a Regents Professor of Marketing at the University of Montana College of Business, and you're listening to A New Angle.
This episode of A New Angle was brought to you by the Montana Code School, enabling the next generation of code-savvy workers. Are you looking to breathe life into your career and maybe bag a promotion at your existing employer? Join Montana's exploding tech sector with great opportunities from local tech companies such as Submittable, ClassPass, ATG, and more. The Montana Code School has full-time and part-time coding programs designed to open up a world of new code-savvy career opportunities, from digital marketer to customer service and web design to junior developer. To learn more about Montana Code School's programs, visit www.montanacodeschool.com/anewangle. That's www.montanacodeschool.com/anewangle. Seats are filling up fast for mid-September classes with financing options available. Check out these guys. They do tremendous work.
And, it took 30 years, but it finally paid off. And then the Fitz thing really blew up because we were we had a bunch of little fortuitous things that happened randomly, but Adam Levine from Maroon 5 was having a tattoo done.
Oh, yeah, I've heard this story.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And he was listening to that EP and said, who is this? And the tattoo artist said, it's Fitz and the Tantrums. So a month later, we were out opening for them, on a college tour. And then, so things like that happen, just one after the other. And so it was kind of in the cards, I think, meant to happen. And so, and I hate to belabor this, and it keeps coming back to branding, because then we had a thing that worked in that band.
Yes.
Right? and it was kind of a throwback Motown thing. We were lumped in with people like Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings, and who was, one of my heroes, and it was a cool scene to be a part of, but we were kind of seeing the writing on the wall that was not going to last, It's like, it seems like
it's a
there's
trend.
It's a trend, exactly. And there's like a cyclical thing where every 3-4 years you get one kind of throwback soul singer that pops through, and we were that kind of, and we didn't want to be that.
Sure.
And Fitz very smartly was kind of like, we need to get away from this. That was another leap of faith for us, where we weren't sure if we were abandoning our audience. And yeah, we were kind of, there was a lot of people very pissed off at the next record. We were using all of our influences from the 80s. We were all products of the 80s, so we were using a lot of those synths and programmed drums, and people were pissed, but more people liked it.
Yeah, You've widened the tent a little bit. Which
again.
pisses people off, but also, you're getting your music in front of more people.
Right. We had that song called The Walker that just blew up. And Out of My League, also another one, went platinum. And it paid off in that way, But it's, I would be lying if I didn't say I was dealing with a lot of that. I call it punk rock guilt, where it's like, you're selling out or something. And as a jazz musician, you really deal with that, man, because I'm playing pop music at this point.
You've sold out a few times on this.
Man. Technically, I had really jumped the shark at that point. So there was a lot. It's still, I still deal with it to a certain extent.
That's fair.
Yeah. But along the way, I've learned a lot. And the one thing, what we can talk about is what happens when you get to a successful point, how it changes.
Yeah, exactly. We had this conversation before we started recording about, you had to kick and scream and grit your way to a shot at success.
Yeah.
And then things came together, and it certainly wasn't easy at any step, right? But then you guys have arrived in a way,
right?
In a huge way.
Yeah.
How does creativity change?
Right.
Once the sort of need to provide food on the table, or find a bed to sleep in, once you've got a little slack in your system,
right?
How does the hunger stick? How does the hunger
manifest?
You
moved to Missoula, Montana, man.
Open up coffee shops.
That's right.
Kids,
yeah, exactly.
All that stuff.
Actually, there's some truth to that.
Absolutely.
It's difficult. Well, first of all, being on the road as much as in the music industry now, there's really just two ways to make any money. Either you have to tour a lot, or you can have your music synced to commercials or movie trailers or movie soundtracks.
You're selling repetitions in many ways.
Because no one's selling any records anymore. With Spotify and Pandora and all these things, no one's making any money off of that. It's licensing that really is, and I've learned a lot about that, and over the last 9 years. And, man, it's being on the road that much in order to make money is tough, because right as we hit success, pay dirt, my daughters were born.
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those things, be careful what you wish for. You might just get it, and it's probably going to happen right at the worst time, when the most amazing thing happens to you and you have kids, twins no less. And
so what are they, 8 now?
They're
7?
9.
9, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was tricky because in the beginning stage of the Fitz and the Tantrums, you might be opening for Maroon 5, but you're not making any money. You're actually basically paying to go out there for the exposure, and so you're not.
They're probably framing it as, we're giving you all this exposure. Why should we pay you?
Yep, exactly. And you're coming back broke, and it was tough,
and you're gone all the time.
Yeah, and Jenna's dealing with twins, in L.A.
Yeah.
With a high overhead, which that's when we decided to move to Montana, because there was this precipice.
And she's from here, right?
Yeah, she was born and raised here. So we were getting family support here. Your dollar goes a lot further here.
It does.
And so just to ease our stress, there was that point where we're like, okay, this could work. it could work. It's not working yet, but it could work. If it does, great. If it doesn't, we're going to land in Missoula versus LA, where we're going to go deeper and deeper in debt.
Yeah.
And with no family support whatsoever. And so that was the reasoning for moving here. But the other tough thing about being on the road that much is I wasn't able to practice anymore. You know, you play every night, and that's a certain skill set. And when I'm on stage, I'm always sort of in the mindset that I'm practicing as well as performing and trying to work on subtle things every night. But it's not the same as being in a practice room.
It's not deep work.
No,
Yeah.
it's not. It's not that isolation that I crave. And so that was a tough part of it too, about the success. And because there was a point there where we were never home, man, for years.
Yeah.
I never saw my kids. When I would come home, you know, my daughters were looking at me like I was a stranger. And it was tough to try to rebuild the connection every time.
Yeah.
And that became the challenge. I was really trying to enjoy the continued success and how it was snowballing, but it was really tough because I felt like I was not being a very good father, and I was not developing a connection with my kids. And so it was tough to enjoy the success, you know, and it was tough not feeling like an artist anymore. You're more of a machine at that point, you know, and I hate to say this stuff because sometimes that punk rock guilt kicks in where I'm like, oh yeah, woe is you. There's guys that would kill to be in that position,
Sure.
you know, and it's true. I would have killed to be in that position that I was in, but it's one of those things where I tell everyone I have the best gig in the world. It's the easiest gig in the world, except the fact that I have to be away from my kids, you know, and my
without
wife.
a doubt.
So yeah, it was really tough. I was the only dad in the band.
Is that still the case, or is that changed?
No, thankfully it's changed in
Yeah.
a big way. Everyone's a dad.
Great.
Noelle, bless her heart, is the only one that's not a parent yet. She's in a tough position, being the only female in the band, you know, and plus she's a front person. So yeah, it'd be tough to go out there with a baby. You know, especially as much of a powerhouse as she is on stage, you know. So yeah, it was tough. They were sympathetic to a certain point, but everyone like didn't really get it, what I was dealing with at that point, and that was frustrating. Honestly, at that point, now that I think about it, I was the only married guy in the band too. So
that creates a whole nother set of issues too.
Yeah, it was tricky, man, you know, and trying to have someone sympathize, but it wasn't really there. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I was thankful to be making some money, and it continued to get bigger. The paychecks were bigger, so that was helping at home. But it was a tricky time. But then as the guys started to get married and started to get babies, they were a lot more sympathetic.
Right.
Within the last few years, it's become easier to the point where we just go out for at most usually about 6 weeks, and then we'll come home for a couple of weeks, do a 6-week run, come home for a couple of weeks, that kind of thing. And that seems to work okay.
Yeah.
You know, as well as it can be. But the guys are a lot more sympathetic now.
Sure, yeah, they get it.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's been a crazy ride seeing how how we've changed to become more successful with the hopes of being more successful. This last record was a very, very big departure, you know, and caused a lot of tension in the band, you know. The goal with the higher ups was to swing for the fences and get on pop radio, which, I mean, you want to talk about punk rock guilt? That was really tough for me. Like, it's the last. I mean, there was a part of me that, look, I love a pop song. I'll listen to Katy Perry, and then I'll go listen to John Coltrane. You know, but so I don't really have that kind of guilt, but it was a little voice in the back of my head saying, "You're selling out even more. This has gone too far." And then again, there was some of that backlash from our fan base.
You feel like you're losing control of your brand in a way, right?
Well, because we signed to a major label, and when you do that, you are beholden to them to a certain extent, and they want to have their voice heard as well in what they think is going to sell. And if you want them behind you, with the machine behind you, and reaping the benefits of a large promotion staff, you have to play the game, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know, and some people choose not to, and maybe it works out sometimes, but more often than not, it doesn't, you know. So we played the game, we swung for the fences, and we had that song Hand Clap that really, you know, was as big
out
as...
of the park.
Yeah. I mean, it sold more in the first 6 months than all of our other ones combined, you know. It was crazy what happened with that, you know, and not so much with any of the other songs on that record, but it sort of was one of those things, well, it didn't really matter, you know. It was like we got this huge hit. But pop radio, and this is where we start to get into like the business aspect of things, you know, as much as no one's making any money off of selling records, radio is still king. And so all of the touring is based around radio formats and the listenership. And so I've learned more and more about radio is still really in charge of everything.
Really?
Yeah, you wouldn't think so, right?
Exactly, you wouldn't.
I certainly didn't think so. But it is. And radio formats like alternative radio, college radio, alternative radio.
Kind of genres, if you will.
Yeah. And we were starting to, you know, we were crossing over into all of these bigger radio formats that were more commercial. But as far as pop radio, meaning like top 40, I think we hit it. You know, we hit up in like 28, something like that, which is really good.
Yeah.
But that was about where we peaked. And we were open for number one, you know. So it was a little frustrating in that. And then, so we've sort of had to re-examine now that we've done servicing that record. Now it's sort of like, okay, where do we go from here?
What's next?
You know? The label wants to hear another hand clap.
Right,
you know?
right, yeah.
But we don't.
Yeah, you want to make another one of those, right.
So that's when you run into, you know, potentially some conflict, or some negotiations and some compromise and that kind of thing, so yeah, we'll see what happens next. It's tricky. It's a balancing act, definitely.
So when does that process start of sitting down or
it has?
It's
you're
already
in the
creative
started.
process now.
Yeah, right now. I mean, we're going out the road, like I say, for about 3 weeks here coming up. But even that feels like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be hitting the road. Maybe we should be writing, you know, and trying to, because, you know, we're writing and turning things in and hoping we get the reaction like, that's it, that's your next hand clap, you know, but so far not so much, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see what happens. It's tricky.
Nice.
It's really tricky. Yeah.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, but I also want to shift gears just a bit and get into drum coffee a little bit.
Yeah, cool.
And I mean, the obvious question that comes to mind, at least to me, is really another coffee shop?
Right.
I mean, that's a cynical question. I mean, I know exactly, deeply respectful and I admire what you guys have done.
Thanks.
So I'm not saying it in any way
I get
dismissive,
it.
but at some point, like you're sort of penciling out this idea, like somebody's got to ask you, really, does Missoula need another coffee shop? Right. So what was missing that you brought to the table, or you wanted to bring to the table?
Yeah, it's a great question, man. So I have this thing. I have this talent, I guess, or obsessive
talent and a curse in the same
wrapper.
Yeah.
Well, so far it's been a blessing. I have this. Well, I have two weird things that go on in my head. I have synesthesia, which sonically, I have a weird form of synesthesia in that I see colors in my mind's eye when I hear sounds.
Okay.
But my form of synesthesia is slightly different than anything I've heard in that it triggers different senses. Synesthesia is usually like one sense is triggering something else in another sense, where I see colors in my mind's eye with combinations of sounds. It's either pleasant or not. And when it's pleasant, I also, another sense, I know this seems like an offshoot, but I promise I'm going to tie
I like
it. I also get this weird chewing sensation, where if something is pleasant, I know it's working because I get this pleasurable sensation.
Huh.
So it works to my benefit in that I'm able to, when I'm in the writing process in music, I'm able to use that in combining and producing music. I know what sounds work well together.
Yeah.
And I wait until that sensation and those colors work. And it also works with culinary things. And this ties into the other aspect of my brain, which I don't really know if it has a name, other than maybe it's type A or maybe it's just obsessive. But I have this brain where even as we're having this conversation, I've already had this conversation with you probably 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
I've scripted it in my head before I even walked in the door, from the time you said, let's get together.
Sure.
So throughout the day, I have that going on in my head, whether it's, and a lot of times it's unfortunate because it can be conflict oriented. Like if there's any conflict in my life, it becomes
I can see how that would
that
be.
obsessive loop.
Yeah, difficult.
It's tough. And not that I have much conflict, but if there ever is or potentially conflict, that conversation or that argument that I'm going to have is scripted.
You can get wound up
to the T. I mean, I know everything. I should have been a lawyer. That's what my dad always said. But the same goes for visualizing the future in my career as a musician and my career as a cafe owner, coffee roaster, barista. So, 2 years in LA for waiting for the phone to ring may have seemed like a long time and very scary to most people, but it wasn't for me because I already had scripted in my head and I knew it was going to work out eventually. I know that sounds weird, but it truly was. Like everyone's like, I remember working in cafes and customers would come through and like, so you're a drummer, huh? Yeah. So how long are you going to do that until you find a real, it was like, no one seemed to understand that the success has already happened in my head so many times that I already know what's going to happen. I live in a constant state of deja vu.
Yeah.
It's already happened in my head. And I hope this isn't coming off as arrogant because it's not
at all.
It's not
it
meant
seems
to
like
be.
you have this deep sort of combination of this ability or passion for visualization.
Right.
But also it's sort of tempered with a little obsessiveness in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but it's worked to my benefit in every aspect of my life, whether it was in music or now in coffee. And you're right. Most people would say, really? Another coffee shop? Well, to me, and don't take this the wrong way, but to me, there's no competition. There isn't any.
Yeah.
I don't even see competition. It's like having blinders on, and the only thing that I see is the visualization that I've had about these cafes. I've already done the success in my head with these cafes.
Okay.
So there isn't any competition.
Although, I mean, to push on that a little bit,
Sure.
like you're a student of the game. I mean, I saw you around town hanging out in a lot of shops, studying before you opened Drum. And then I assume you're doing that on the road too. Like you're going for your runs and you're visiting the best shops in all these towns you're touring in. So though you're not directly competing necessarily with those shops, you're kind of interacting you're learning from the marketplace.
Always learning. But I was really lucky in that when I first came up, and this again will tie in, when I first came up in the 90s in Seattle, when that coffee scene was blowing up, there was a reason it was blowing up in Seattle, not just the weather and people needing more caffeine. The scene was blowing up because the cafe scene there was really awesome. It was a social scene where, I mean, technically now we're making so much better coffee now in cafes. Like when I think back to the coffee I was putting out back then, it was kind of a joke.
Yeah.
But it was all about the hang. And I'm sure Jeff Ament could speak to this as well.
Yeah,
like he was working in cafes back. It was all about this hang
The
that was
third
around.
place, the scene.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what was missing. Because the science of coffee now has eclipsed the hang, which is what coffee is all about. It's all about the social environment that it creates. It's ideally, I mean, if you go to Italy, it never left. But you go to Italy, it's like going into a bar at 8 in the morning, you know? Literally, you're going to the bar at 8 in the morning. And it's that sort of social environment. There's, you know, that went away in typical fashion, and I hate to say in American fashion, but it's kind of true. We take things too far, where we there's a reason I go into those cafes when I'm on the road, is to honestly pick out what I wouldn't do a lot of times.
Yep.
I don't mean to be snobby,
No,
but I learn like
you develop some clarity of what you want to do and what you don't.
It's the same, you know, like any artist would tell you, steal what you like from all those different places, and that provided a much clearer vision. For instance, I'll give you an example. Like when I was touring through Boston, I went to a cafe called Blue State Coffee, and Blue State it's lately not doing so great, but when I first went in there, it was one of the best shots of espresso I've ever had. But when I looked around, I looked to my back, and they had this system where when you bought a coffee from them, they give you a wooden token. And with that token, you turn to your right, and there's 3 charities that you can donate to, based on whatever pulls your heartstrings the most, right? And then they would in turn donate 2% of their sales to whatever charity they
allocated as a proportion of the tokens.
I'm like, why wouldn't everyone do that? That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So I'm stealing from all these different places. There's a place in New York City called Abrazo. It's like vibe. The guy there behind the bar remembers. I knew from the first time I met him, he remembered what it was like on the West Coast in the 90s for the coffee scene. It was so much fun walking into that place. It was a shoebox, like no bigger than your office here. You walk in, and it was like the most amazing experience. And the food they were putting out was incredible. It's just the hang was so amazing there. Abrazo, I was like, that's it. That's what I want mine to feel like, you know? So I'm learning from all of those places, but what it does is it gives me my vision even more clearly defined and stronger, where when we're building out these cafes, I know every inch what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
You know, I know exactly the type of staff that I want to hire. I know what those personalities are going to be. I know what the vibe of the cafe is going to be. It's insane. It is obsessive.
Like, do you and Jenna align on this stuff? Like, I assume
she kind of just lets me do my thing.
I was wondering kind of how that
and
works.
then tells me to chill out. You know, like when I need to chill out. But where we align is, where we align really big time is a lot of the aesthetics of the interiors of the cafe.
Yep.
She and I, thankfully, because everything I've read about starting businesses with you. With your spouse is usually a recipe for disaster. But with she and I, thankfully, very rarely do we run into anything where we're butting heads on it. The only time we ever run into situations like that is that I'm freaking out because the vision is being strayed from at all.
Yeah.
And that's usually me needing to chill out,
Yep.
you know, and allowing some slight variation in that vision. And which I need, you know, I need to hear it. Otherwise, I would drive myself absolutely insane. Because, like I say, every inch, every little thing has been planned out in my head so many times. It's like, you know, it's obsessive.
You know, and you can tell instantly when you walk into one of your cafes that that's the case. Like hearing you tell this sort of how your process works, like. Yes, I can see that when I walked into the South Street shop for the first time. I mean, everything's different.
Yeah.
The tile, the machine, and all of it is sort of perfected by the people. You've got awesome staff, and they are so jazzed up and passionate about what they're doing, and it all kind of coalesces.
Yeah.
And the value proposition, I mean, for using a sort of a corny business school term, it's very clear.
Yeah.
It's a place you want to be.
Well, I have to tell you, you know, it all started. Jenna also worked in cafes in the 90s in Seattle. And we remembered what worked staff-wise and what didn't.
Yeah. What
type of personalities were the ones you couldn't wait to work with at 6 a.m.?
Yep.
And what ones you dreaded. And the first person we hired, we stole from Taco del Sol here, was Kendra Bell. I went in to get, when we were building out the space on South Avenue, I went to get a burrito there, and she was working behind the counter. And I saw her and the way she interacted and her energy. And I was like, that's it.
That's it. She's
and
the one.
I remember there was this girl Jenna and I, we both worked for Cafe Vita at one point in Seattle. And there was a girl named Nicole that worked there. And we always wanted to find our Nicole because we knew Nicole was the best.
Yep.
And when I went in and I saw Kendra, I was like, there's our Nicole. And so then I started stalking her. And I went back just to see if it really was as good as I thought it was. I kept going back, and like, sure enough, every day I saw her, she was just phenomenal with customers. And so I grabbed Jenna and I brought her there, and I said, I think I found her Nicole. And she went in and in 1 minute was like, oh my God, that's her. And so we waited till she was out wiping tables, and we were like, can we talk to you for a minute? And thankfully she was open to it, and she was ready for a change and ready to bring on more responsibility in her life. But look, it's an awkward situation, man, because and it worked this way with both of the cafes we've opened so far. Is literally the day after we open, I split.
For tour.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, thanks, I'm out, and hope that it works. And the reason it works is that we know what works from working in cafes for so many years and what type of personality we want behind the counter. And we also know what not to stress about. There's certain things, there's certain things that I think a lot of cafe owners stress about that really they need to let go. And I hate to say this, I'm in an enviable position because my other day job pays me pretty well. And so maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I can honestly say I think a lot of people are a little bit too concerned with the bottom line right out of the gate, and they're losing the long game, which is what people come in for is the experience. And this is going to sound really cheesy, but coffee in particular can be a transcendent experience. If you walk in and the coffee is amazing, the person behind the counter is amazing, and a lot of the other stuff can fade away into the background temporarily while you build that following, the same way I built it in bands in Seattle. If you give them something that's transcendent, that they walk away with like, holy moly, I just walked in the door and I felt like I entered a different country.
Yes.
It's the same as when I was doing crazy bands that I put together that I knew were amazing creatively and giving people something completely different that they couldn't find anywhere else. And that bar owner let me develop every Monday night. It's the same exact philosophy with these cafes. I'm lucky in that I'm able to take a deep breath because financially I've got this other gig. But it's the same, man. It's the exact same as starting those nights in Seattle at those clubs. It's just that it's just a different medium. It's the exact same thing, and so far, thankfully, everything is paying off, and now we've entered into the roasting world, which for me, is the next logical step. Next to payroll, that's our biggest overhead.
Sure. Roast your own.
We were using black coffee, and Matt and Jim are some of the most awesome people I've ever met in my life. And it was honestly, that was the only tough part about
those relationships,
bringing that in.
Yeah.
Is that I adore those people. They're like really good people, and there was, that was tough. And, but as a business owner, it was a decision that I had to make. But also, honestly, I don't mean this to sound cheesy, but that's an aspect of the art form of coffee that I didn't want to deprive myself of.
Sure.
Like that, next to being a barista, which I think is an art form, that's the next level.
That's the next step.
And being able to, I get the same rush being at a roaster or behind the bar at my espresso machine that I do playing in front of 30,000 people. It's that same zone that you get into when it's busy in your cafe or when you're about to screw up a roast. That rush is the exact same as I get playing music. So that's why I chose it as, Act 2 for me. None of us are getting any younger in the band.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's not really sustainable as a family man to do that schedule, especially as my daughters are getting older and their memories are going to be more intact. I don't know, they're in third grade now. I don't remember too much from third grade, but
most of the memories I have from third grade involve my parents. So
right.
I get what you're getting at here.
Yeah, man. I don't want to lose out on that,
totally.
for much longer. And I think the rest of the band, now that they're parents, feel the same way. So we'll see, none of us are kids anymore. So we're starting to, I think, see, okay, let's see what we can do with this, how far we can push it, and then what's Act 2. And that's sort of the bedrock for these cafes, are the bedrock for Act 2 for me. And it's sort of like already started for me, so it's a little different, but thankfully it's working. And it hasn't been stressful, thankfully. It seems like a natural progression, but maybe that goes back to that scripting that I've done in my head.
You've already seen it happen.
Yeah, I think so, man. It's like I think I've already scripted it, so it doesn't feel wrong. But, I don't know. Talking to you now about this, there's very few times where I question that scripting, but until it's like, what do I compare it to? It's like you don't realize there's no safety net under you until you look down.
Until you look down.
And I guess this is my looking down. It's one of those things where I'm always surprised when I take a pause like this and talk about it, just at how successful everything has become.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful for it. But at the same time, it's also scary when you talk about it because you take a break from scripting,
Yeah. Well, the script kind of comes out of your head a little bit. And you read it back to yourself in a way. Like, I don't know if this analogy is working, but... Yeah, it is. And then you're like, oh, shoot, is the other shoe going to drop at some point? But so far, it's been nothing but fun. And that's the most important thing. Right.
I made a few resolutions. I remember one night walking in Seattle at 3 a.m. in the morning and I was walking on Pine Street going towards my apartment downtown and seeing all of the windows in those buildings downtown, and each of one of them had a cubicle in it. And I swore to myself then and there that I would never work in a cubicle, and I would never work for assholes, and that everything I would do with my life would be fun so that it didn't feel like work. And so far I've come close on the asshole thing a couple times because it's the music industry after all. But so far I haven't broken really those resolutions. And it's worked out, thankfully. Sometimes I can't believe it's worked out, but there again, like everything in my brain told me it was going to work out. So.
Well, I think those themes about why it's worked out are fairly clear to anyone who's been listening. I mean, just this dedication, this vision, this clarity you have with your own sense of brand and your own personal mission. It's neat to hear it kind of all put together. And John, this has been great, and
dude,
I appreciate the hang, the wisdom.
I'm gonna go cry now because you made me think about everything. But
okay, no, you can expense the therapy to the podcast.
That's what this was like, man. It was good therapy, actually. It was great. No, cool, but man. Thanks for having me, man. I look, I have to tell you, just following your exploits, just in the running realm, it's like a huge inspiration to me. And there's characters around this town that, like yourself and guys we were talking about earlier, Steve Brown and all these guys, where I don't think people realize the impact that they have on other people. And that's the benefit, I think, of this small town is that we see these people as normal people, like we're talking now, but had I not known you, what you do to me would have seemed so like superhero-esque. Like the things you've been able to attain athletically are just mind-blowing to me, man. And like, and it's so inspirational, because then when I get to meet you face to face, I'm like, you know, maybe this stuff is kind of attainable, or maybe, you know, you should give it a shot, you know, and maybe this lifestyle is something that's attainable. And, you know, I don't really get, because I'm away so much, I'm in and out a lot, and I don't really get to tell the people around this town how inspirational they are to me, and that includes yourself, man. Like, it's mind-blowing, because it's funny, like I go out on the road and people follow my exploits online, whether it's Instagram or Facebook.
Yep.
But what people don't realize is, like, yourself, Mike Foote, Mike Wolf, like all these guys, I stalk them and yourself online, and I'm following you. And when I'm out there in that reality, that's my world. Is I'm following you guys and trying to just scratch the surface of what you guys are able to do in that world. So, anyways, thanks, man.
Wow.
I really appreciate it, man.
That's very kind.
And I mean it. I mean it with all my heart. It's been a life-changing experience moving here and being in this town and being exposed to this world of ultra running and you know, climbing and just being outdoors. You know, like it's changed my life, and it's changed my family's life, and I owe a lot to this town and folks like yourself for inspiring me to do it. So thanks. Yeah,
It's a two-way street. Thanks,
yeah,
John.
absolutely.
All right, hope you enjoyed that conversation with John. I certainly thought it was fun. Coming up next week, we have Olympic mountain biker Sam Schultz, local Missoula hero, and just a big inspiration to me. It's just Sam has had a bumpy road with his health the last 4 or 5 years, and has just had such a graceful way of transitioning into just kind of this soul rider, community activist, spiritual leader here in the Missoula, Montana mountain biking community. And it was cool to catch up with Sam, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. Remember that A New Angle was brought to you by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. They're one of the largest electrical wholesale suppliers in the country, with nearly 600 locations nationwide. CED is a privately held business-to-business company that distributes just about every piece of equipment you need to keep your lights on, your energy flowing, and your lifestyle comfortable. CED is also an important employer in our community, and they have a keen interest in University of Montana graduates. To explore career opportunities, check out www.cedcareers.com. And if you enjoy this podcast, there are several ways you can support it. First, please rate us on iTunes. Ratings help others find the podcast. Second, write a review. The more reviews we get, and hopefully positive ones, the more we can grow. And third, just tell your friends about it. Before we go, I'd like to thank a few folks for making this podcast happen. First off, thanks to Elizabeth Willey, Communications Director here at the College of Business. And thanks to our fabulous interns, Savannah Sletton and Max Gibson. I'd also like to give a special shout out to VTO for providing us with music. And finally, thanks to our producer, Jeff Meese. As we go, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #ANewAngle when you do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.